Hey guys, it's Carla. Before I get started, I want to show you a quick preview of how this portrait comes together. Now I'm starting with my background already painted, and I've painted it with a raw sienna color, and I've sketched on my outline, and I know you can't see that very well, but I can as I paint it. And you can sketch yours on darker if you'd like. If you want that free outline, I'll put a link in the description below to my Facebook page, and that's where I post all of my outlines and reference photos, so you can go on there and print those off for free. So I'm starting with my smaller details like the eyes and nose with a small round synthetic brush. This is just a cheap brush, and this is cheap paint, but just get one that fits the area that you're working in. So if you want to paint this larger, then you'll need maybe larger brushes. This one is about an 8 by 10. I know that most of my videos I tell you to keep your brush moving and paint fast. This is not one of those. With portraits, you really do have to slow down and pay attention to detail. I'll go ahead and apologize for the length of this video. It's about an hour long. But if you're following along with it painting, then I guess you'll appreciate that. If you're just watching it, maybe not so much. Now all of these lines will be in the outline on my Facebook page. So like I said, I know it's hard to see on the monitor where I've outlined it, but all of these lines that I'm painting are on there. And obviously I rinsed my brush between the dark color and the white. On my palette, this is acrylic paint. On my palette I've got white, raw sienna, burnt umber, black, red, and phthalo blue. This painting is called The Head of Christ, or sometimes it's called Salmon Head, the Salmon Head, because it was painted by Warner Salmon. But he was an American artist, and he painted this back in 1940. And a lot of people have reproduced it over the years, and I had a request from one of you to paint this, so I thought I'd try my hand at it. The brush I'm using right here is a hog bristle brush, and I actually like this particular brand. I don't typically care about the brands, but I like this brand of hog bristle brush, so I'll put it in the description if you want to order one of those. But it's just a flat hog bristle brush. It's actually a bright hog bristle, and it works well for kind of giving a soft look. So I use it a lot in my portraits because I want that soft skin look, and so I've got different sizes of them to use in different size areas. Now on this background, I want it really like plain white right up against him, but then as I get farther away, I'm adding color to it. And obviously you can change this up any way you want, because you can't duplicate a painting anyway. So it's always going to look different than what you're looking at, so just kind of make it your own. The main thing is to have it light around his face and then get darker toward the edge, and then on the other side it's going to be darker right beside him. It's going to be, that whole side is going to be fairly dark. And I rinsed my brush before I picked up that brown. You know, obviously nobody knows today what Jesus actually looked like, but all my life I've grown up with this image because like I've got an old family Bible that has this on the front of it, and this is just the most common image or portrayal of Jesus that I've seen. You'll notice when you're using these brushes that when you first pick up the paint, you want to go into your darker areas or brighter or whatever, you know, wherever you want the most of that color. But then as you get less and less paint on your brush, you can kind of scrub it on and give it that softer look. So over here, even though it's the light side, I still want it dark in the corners around the edges because that draws the eye toward the center of the painting. And you can spend as little or as much time on this background as you want. I didn't spend a lot of time on it because I didn't want the video to be even longer, but I did work with it until I got something I was happy with. Again, I'm trying to draw the eye toward the face. All right, now I've switched to a smaller brush, and it's still a flat hog bristle, but I switched to a size that works better for where I'm painting. So right now I'm concentrating on the darkest areas, the black areas. Because once I get those in, I can come back around it, and I don't know, it seems to work better to put darker colors in first, because those are like, sometimes they're just darker just because they're darker. Sometimes it's because they're deeper, like they're either in shadow or they're more recessed. But either way, it works better to put that in first. So sometimes with this brush, I'm brushing it on. Sometimes I'm scrubbing it on with the side of the brush. Sometimes I'm like dabbing it on. It just really depends on what effect you're trying to get at the moment. So I would suggest that whatever brush you're using, you just kind of play around with it and see what it can do. That way when you need it to do a certain thing, then you know how to do it to get that effect. While I'm painting this, I'm just looking back and forth at the reference photo to see where the darks are and where there's hard lines and where there's soft lines, because that's important. If you make the whole thing with just hard lines and you don't soften the edges, then it's going to look, I guess, kind of cartoonish or just not very appealing. So as you run out of paint on your brush, like I said before, when you have a lot of paint on your brush, you go into where you want the most paint. But as it gets less and less paint on it, you can use that to kind of dab or scrub at the edges to soften them. Guys, if y'all like this video, please give it a thumbs up. And don't forget to subscribe if you haven't yet. That way, if you subscribe and hit that notification bell, then you can be notified when I put out another video. Now right here where I'm starting on his beard, I'm starting in the darkest area. Again, when I have a lot of paint on my brush. And then that way I can kind of fuzz it out as I get toward the edges. And I'm using black and a little bit of brown, just depends on where I'm going with it. And again, that's where you'll just have to look at your reference photo and see what colors you see in there. But you do want to make sure that on your darkest areas that you make them really dark, and on your lightest areas really light, because that contrast is what's going to give it dimension. Keep it from looking flat. But see how you can really soften that edge there at the bottom? Well, here at the top too. Because I don't have much paint on my brush. So I can just kind of dab or scrub at it and get that effect. So I'm just paying attention to the shape of the beard. And there's dark areas in it and there's light areas, so I'm just trying to kind of paint what I see. I love this picture of Jesus because, like I said, I grew up with it. That's just what I always grew up thinking he looked like. But now that I'm grown and have studied more, I know that he probably didn't look anything like this because he was Middle Eastern, so chances are he didn't have this brown hair and light skin. But who knows? Now right here I'm taking advantage of not having much paint on my brush, and I'm going into that deeper area right there between the eye and the nose. So now I'm mixing up a color for part of the face, and you really just have to play with this and until you get the shade you see. I think I changed it a few times. Okay, so I tried that and that was way too light. But the good thing about paint is you can paint right over it if you mess up or if you get a color you don't like or whatever. But you do want to go subtle with it because when it dries a little darker than it is when it's wet. So you got to keep that in mind when you're putting it on there. And sometimes you look at your painting like it is right now, and it's like, it doesn't make a lot of sense. It's like that dark spot beside his eye, that doesn't make sense or whatever. But then it does come together. It's just until you get all of the lights and darks in, then sometimes it looks a little bit strange. I paint portraits for a living, and people and pets. But with people, I don't do them in color. I do them in black and white, so that's a lot easier. So mixing skin tones with paint is not real simple. It does help, though, to have the background already painted. I mean the canvas already painted, because then you don't have to cover every area. If you use a color that's already maybe in the skin, then it makes it a lot easier to paint with any painting, and that's not just portraits. But if you start off with a colored canvas, then it really, really helps. I know that this is typically not the kind of painting video that I do, because I do quicker paintings, but I wanted to make sure with this one that I showed you every step. I mean, the only thing I've left out is when I rinse my brush and change brushes, but so I've included everything in this so that hopefully it'll make it easier to follow along. Sometimes you just really have to look at the reference photo and get a plan. And I don't know about you, but I tend to jump around a lot when I'm painting. I go from one area to another, because if I stay in one area too long, then I think maybe I overthink it and it ends up not looking right. So if I go to a different area and then come back to that one, then I get a new perspective on it. I also like to walk away from it and come back. That helps too. I think what really makes this painting pop is all the highlighting that he did in the hair and on the face. And when you do it, especially with acrylic paint, you have to kind of put several layers of the white on because it dulls down when it dries, but it's definitely worth it. I'm just kind of scumbling around with my brush at the bottom here, just to kind of make it, I guess, undefined. Now, when you're offloading your brush, you can just wipe it on a paper towel if you have one handy. Now here I'm just looking at my reference photo and seeing where these are not where the brightest highlights are. They're kind of beside the brightest highlights, so they're more subtle. Sometimes when you're painting with a dry brush like this, you kind of feel like you're not accomplishing anything, but because it's so subtle, but you are, and subtle is what you want. You want to start off subtle and then just gradually build it up. I think right here I'm just kind of changing the shape of the eyebrow. I wasn't quite happy with it. and the shading around the eye. But I've got very little paint on my brush doing this because I want it to be subtle. I'm mixing up a shade for my lips. And I don't want those to be real defined. I'm just kind of dabbing in some color. And then with the liner brush, I'm going to pick up a little dark color and create the line between the lips. So now I've gone back to my hog bristle brush and putting in some dark around the mouth. Now this is some of the more subtle highlights in the hair. It's not the brightest ones. So now I've rinsed my brush and I'm going in with the bright white. And I know it looks really bright right now, but it will dull down, so we'll have to come back in and brighten it up. So there's areas where I want a sharp line, and then there's some where I want it kind of fuzzed out. So again, just look at your reference photo and see what you need. So right here I'm going into my brightest area on the forehead, in the center of the brightest area, when I've got the most paint on my brush, and then kind of fuzz it out later. And again, if you need to wipe it on a paper towel, do that if you can't get enough paint off your brush. And it might feel strange putting this bright white on here like this, but that's one of the characteristics of this painting, is the highlights. Just pay attention to the angle of all of your highlights and shadows and lines and everything. Angle is really important. So like, pay attention to whether it's completely horizontal, if it's kind of slanted a little bit or whatever. And when you do that, if you just think about the lines and the shapes and the angles and all that, instead of thinking about what you're painting, then sometimes you get a better outcome, because we kind of get in our heads what we think something's supposed to look like. So when we're painting it, we paint it like that instead of how it really is. So if you just look at a painting or look at your reference photo as lines and shapes and colors, then sometimes you're better off. Now on the clothes, I made sure I got the shape and the lay of the clothes right and everything. But as far as color, I just kind of did my own thing on that. I mean, you can try to be more precise on it if you want. But again, I didn't want to make this video too long, so I just kind of scrubbed in some highlights and shadows and color in the clothes. But don't feel at all like you have to do this really fast. I mean, it could take you several sessions of, painting for an hour at a time or whatever, but at home you can take your time with it. I just Didn't have that liberty here. Now I'm using a synthetic round brush, and I've watered down the white so that, and it looks bright right now, but when it dries, it'll just be kind of subtle because it's watered down. But I'm going right over that bright white that I put in, and it'll stay bright, but then all of it, when it dries, it's just not as bright as it was when it went on. And I'm painting over the shadows I put in too, but I can put those back in. But this is just very watered down white. So I think that's fairly dry right there, and you can see it dulled down quite a bit. So it's just kind of a film of white on it. Okay, so now I put another color on my palette. It's in craft paint. It's called King's Gold, which is ironic because he's our king, but it kind of gives some warmth to the face, and more of a, I guess, more of a glow. I don't know, but I think I go back several times and kind of add some different color to the face. But this is just, I've watered this down, so it's kind of just a glaze. I like using glazes because when you do, you don't lose what's underneath it. It still shows through. Sometimes you got to go back and maybe brighten it or darken it, but it still shows, so you don't lose it. But the glaze just kind of adds a different shade or a different color to your painting. And now I'm just trying to carry that color on through the rest of the painting. Now to put this glaze on, I'm using a synthetic brush, just a synthetic flat brush. With a glaze, you don't want to use the hog bristle brush because it's stiffer and it might pull off your paint underneath. So you want to use a softer brush. So I'm just putting some of my dark back in. This is watered down brown. If you want a color, but you don't want it to be so bold, then watering it down helps. And you don't have to use water. You can use glazing liquid or something like that. But thinning it down helps to soften it and not be so bold. So now I'm going back with white again. All right, now I'm using a liner brush, like a very thin, very small round brush, to put the black in the pupils. So now I'm making a little bit warmer glaze. I added some red to that King's Gold. And just changing the shade again a little bit. And this is watered down. You just really have to play with it until you get the shade you want. But this is why I don't when I paint commissioned portraits, I don't paint them in color, except the pets. Now see, when that dried, that changed the shade a lot. It's kind of amazing how much this acrylic paint changes when it dries, especially when you water it down, because the water is the reason for the change. When it evaporates, it changes. All it leaves is the pigment behind, so the more water, the more change. I'm making a glaze again with some red and brown. Now this glaze I'm not doing all over because there's certain areas that are just more red than others. Brightening up my bright spots. You might not have to do quite as much playing around with your skin tones as I did, but if you do, it's fine. Just wait till one color dries before you glaze on a different color. All right, now I'm going to darken the background on the left side. And this is just watered down brown. But I want it to be really dark over there against the light hair. Guys, I know this was a long video, and I apologize for that, but hopefully you learned something from it, and maybe you'll give this a try. I'm just making this as dark as possible without it being a solid. I still want my background color to kind of show through, so as dark as possible without it being like dark brown. So I hope you guys like this, and thank you so much for watching. Hope you have a great day, and God bless you.